Hello, good evening. Thank you for joining our public scoping meeting for the Off-Road Vehicle Management Plan at Fire Island National Seashore. My name is Michelle Carter. I'm a project manager with the National Park Service, and I have been helping facilitate the ORV planning effort, and I'm going to serve as your host this evening. A couple of items here before we get started. Since we're in a virtual environment, participants will remain on mute to avoid meeting background noise and other technical issues. And the meeting is being recorded, so it'll be available on the project website after we've had a chance to apply the closed captions. Next slide. So the purpose of our meeting this evening is to share information on a proposal for updating the Fire Island driving regulation, to take questions from the public, and consistent with the parks enabling legislation, the goals of this effort are to support a roadless character, to protect visitor safety and experience, and to both update and clarify the permitting process. I want to clarify that the purpose of the public scoping period is to take public input on a proposal that the park has been working on in consideration of comments that they've received during past public comment periods. I think everyone connected to this effort recognizes that there are many aspects of the Fire Island driving program that make this a very complicated and personal issue, and that there are a lot of stakeholders with different and sometimes conflicting needs. So the NPS is just asking that you, as you consider this proposed action, that you also understand that a decision has not yet been made. Where we are right now is we have an opportunity for the public and for stakeholders to provide input on the proposal. And after considering this input, the team may further refine the proposal, and the public will have another opportunity to provide comment in the form of an EA or an environmental assessment. Here in a minute, we'll go through introductions, and then we'll have an overview of the proposal by the park staff. We'll also wrap up the meeting with a question and answer session. But in preparation for that Q&A session, we wanted to point your attention to FAQs that the park has already developed that are available on the website. And these FAQs were developed in response to some of the comments and questions we've received so far. So if the team serving as moderators could drop in a link to the FAQs right now, it would be appreciated. And with that, next slide, please. So just really quick before having the park staff introduce themselves, I want to share a little bit about my role. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a project manager with the National Park Service. I'm based in a program office called the Environmental Quality Division, and that office serves as the National Environmental Policy Act, or the NEPA policy office for the Park Service. Here on the Zoom meeting invite, you'll see a couple of other names that are associated with our contractor, WSP. They were hired to gather data, to help us write documents, and to help with the public comment analysis. Together, our roles are strictly planning support, and we're trying to help make sure that the park is complying with NEPA as they move through the planning process. The final decision about how to move forward is going to be a collaborative effort between the park staff and the regional office. So now I'd like to offer an opportunity for the park staff from Fire Island to come on video and give a brief introduction of themselves. And Alex, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alexi Romero. Alex, most of you know me as. I'm the superintendent here at Fire Island National Seashore.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brendan Newell. I'm the resource manager here at Fire Island National Seashore.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Pristopa. I'm the Chief of Administration at Fire Island National Seashore.
Hello, I'm Sonia Tajani, the Concessions Management and Permit Specialist.
Hello, I'm Supervisory Park Ranger Bernie Felix.
All right, great. Thanks, team. And now if we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, this session is going to be recorded so we can view it later, and we'll share information on where you're going to be able to find it. For anybody that may have just joined, to minimize the background noise and technical issues, attendees will remain muted, but you'll be able to submit your questions using the question box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If at any point during the meeting you're having trouble with Zoom, you can type your issue into the question box and our moderator will respond and do their best to try to help you through any issues. Next slide, please. The National Park Service has community agreement standards that we like to share during our meetings. And there's a quote that says, "No one knows everything, but together we know a lot." And that's why we're here tonight. It's to discuss the proposal, to hear what questions you all have, and to talk through how you can best provide input. There's additional agreement information about our agreement here. We just ask that everyone interact respectfully, that we assume good intentions, and that we challenge with care. I also wanted to mention that during the Q&A session, when we get there, questions might not be answered in the order that they're received. The team's going to be trying to organize questions into groups if themes end up presenting themselves. Next slide, please. Okay. So as I mentioned tonight, we're wanting to share information about our proposal and to do our best to answer questions that will help you provide constructive comments on the proposed action. We also wanted to mention that any formal comments or anything you want the NPS to consider outside of this meeting, that you submit those comments either on the project website, and you'll see that address here on the screen. The moderating team may also be able to drop a link to that website in the chat. And if for some reason the website wouldn't work for you, you can also submit comments in writing to the park headquarters at the address on the screen. I'll be reiterating these points a little bit later in the presentation, so I can't tell if there's anybody that's just on the phone, but if so, just have a paper and pen handy and we'll go over that later in the presentation. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Superintendent Romero.
Thank you once again, Michelle. Good evening again, and thank you for joining us. Most of you know me. My name is Alexi Romero. I am the superintendent here at Fire Island National Seashore. It's hard to believe that I am wrapping up my 5th year. This past October marked 5 years that I started my assignment here at Fire Island. I was out of the park for around 12 weeks on an incredible assignment in Philadelphia as the superintendent of Independence National Historical Park. It's categorized as an icon park, and there's only a handful of icon parks throughout the country. And they usually receive this status because of a homeland security threat that they may have, or because of First Amendment demonstrations and protests that may occur at these park sites. Some of them are the Statue of Liberty, Mount Rushmore, the Gateway Arch, National Mall, Memorial Parks are just a handful of those icon parks. And I was there at Independence National Historical Park for around 12 weeks. As much as I love that assignment, the projects and the programs there is nothing more. There's nothing better than being back home and being at Fire Island National Seashore. I'm so happy to be back to wrap up some of the projects like the off-road vehicle driving management program and update that we are about to go over. We began this project a little over 4 years ago, and we are finally at the NEPA process. I believe we've come a long way, heard your concerns loud and clear, and you may not be satisfied, 100% satisfied with what we're about to present. But the big question that I have to ask all of you, can we live with it? So we will go into a deeper discussion in a few more slides in this presentation. Next slide, please. Most of you are familiar with the establishment of Fire Island National Seashore for the purpose of conserving and preserving for the use of future generations certain relatively unspoiled and undeveloped beaches, dunes, and other natural features within Suffolk County, New York, which possesses high values to the nation as examples of unspoiled areas of great natural beauty in close proximity to large concentrations of urban population. This is the law that established Fire Island National Seashore. Many of you do know this. And in 1980, Congress passed the law establishing Otis Pike High Dunes Wilderness Area, which extends east of Watch Hill for almost 7 miles to the Smith Point County Park. Next slide, please. Again, many of you that are participating in today's discussion are very familiar with the Fire Island National Seashore General Management Plan, which preserves the roadless character of Fire Island and ensure that water-based transportation is the primary form of access to Fire Island whenever and wherever feasible. Collaborate to support a roadless environment and maintain water-based transportation, and use the regulations that are currently in place to manage vehicle access on Fire Island. The enabling legislation value and need for protection of the environment on Fire Island. So in recognition that the results of this was a grassroots effort that started with communities and stakeholders that established Fire Island National Seashore. The General Management Plan was finalized in 2016, and it details the collaboration between the 7 layers of jurisdiction on Fire Island. We'll talk about those jurisdictions in the next slides. The General Management Plan also recognized the importance of communities' roles as stewards in protecting Fire Island as that roadless character. One thing I want to point out, vehicles were used on the island long before Congress established the National Seashore, traveling both on the interior paths along the beach. The National Park Service is not proposing any hardened surfaces to be built on the island as part of this proposal. Next slide, please. So again, many of these things that I'm going over are recaps. Current ORV driving regulation, most of you are familiar with this. The Blue Book defines the regulations for overstand driving on the National Park Service lands on Fire Island National Seashore. They were first developed in 1977 and amended in 1987. Most key requirements have remained the same since. Intended to protect the natural and cultural resources and visitor experience while allowing access to privately owned properties within the seashore. The regulations allow for particular use, and in our case, our ORV driving regulations allow for driving across federal lands. We manage it through a permitting process, which again, many of you are very familiar with. Next slide, please. Again, just to recap, there are 7 layers of jurisdiction here at the park, at least 7 competing interests and missions that often do not align, further requiring everyone within the boundaries of the National Seashore to work together to manage our shared resources. It is not common in national parks to have this number of jurisdictions and varying issues. But the beauty of our complex tapestry is that there is something for everyone here at Fire Island. And there is a common thread all jurisdictions have, and that is protecting our resources. Between its collection of natural tracts and parklands to the varying characters of each community, each one of these various tracts and public lands make Fire Island a unique resource. And protecting these resources is a very delicate balance. And just to recap one more time, the 7 layers of jurisdiction are federal, the National Park Service. We work with Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineer. We have state and as well tribal. We have county, town, 2 towns, the town of Islip and town of Brookhaven. We have villages that we work with, hamlets, and of course our nonprofit, the Nature Conservancy. Next slide, please. So as we go through this NEPA process, we always begin with a purpose and need. So the purpose of this process is to evaluate ORV use at the seashore and review existing 1987 ORV regulations to accomplish overlapping goals. Protect the seashore resources and safe visitor experience. Allow appropriate and equitable vehicle access to supplement water-based transportation. I think that's an important bullet. This is not to only complement it, but it's to supplement water-based transportation. Improve the administration of the ORV permitting program. The seashore needs to consider revisions to address changes in development, access, and technology on Fire Island and the dynamic nature of the barrier island, and finally provide the Seashore future flexibility as conditions continue to change. And we quickly realized that with the pandemic, that some things that were not written to the regulations needed to be amended in future regulations like what we are discussing tonight. Okay, next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Brendan. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Alex. So the next few slides, we will give a brief overview of considerations in developing alternatives that align with the project's purpose and need. Next slide, please. This is a high-level summary of data and other information that the team has been using throughout the planning process to develop the alternative actions to update the regulation. All of this information will continue to be used in the environmental assessment to inform the impacts associated with each alternative. A few specific examples of science and reports used to inform this process are the 2011 Fire Island National Seashore Alternative Transportation Study completed by the Volpe Center, studies on driving impacts on dune vegetation on Fire Island, the 2003 Negotiated Rulemaking Advisory Committee for Off-Road Vehicle Driving Regulations at the Fire Island National Seashore, and the Seashore's programmatic agreement with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on threatened and endangered species management. Next slide. Throughout this process, we've considered and will continue to evaluate the impacts of proposed alternatives on resources, visitors, and stakeholders within the seashore. The primary impacts considered include public and visitor safety, socioeconomics, including the effects on the communities, dune systems and plant communities, wildlife, threatened and endangered species, the sunken forest preserve, visitor use and experience, cultural resources, and MPS managed sections of Burma Road. Next slide. Now we're going to review the key elements of 3 alternatives to update the Seashore's ORV management program and the current regulation. This includes a no action alternative and 2 action alternatives. Next slide. The key updates to the regulation and management program that are proposed in the action alternatives include updates to permit caps, round trips through the gate per day, qualifications and definitions for each of the action alternatives, seasonal driving, and some overarching considerations. Next slide. This table summarizes the maximum permit caps under each driving category for each alternative. Column A shows the existing permit caps and the current driving regulation, which would be maintained under the no action alternative. In addition to being an alternative, the no action alternative is the baseline which we measure impacts against for the action alternatives. Column B and column C describe the permit caps for each action alternative. That is, the alternatives that would result in a change from a baseline condition if implemented. Alternative B is the proposed action at this stage in the process. Column B shows the permit caps that would be updated in the new regulation under the MPS proposed action for each category. This includes an increase of up to 200 year-round residential permits, an increase of up to 145 construction business permits, the separation of public utility and essential service permits into 2 categories with no strict permit limit on each, and the removal of a trip cap for the recreational driving on the east end for hunting and fishing access. Column C shows an additional alternative that is under consideration, which is identical to the proposed action, except there is no set limit on permit caps for year-round residents and construction business permits. Under all alternatives, applicants must meet the conditions to qualify for each permit, and we will discuss those qualifications more later in this presentation. The superintendent may issue temporary permits for hardships, and part-time residents would remain as they are now. This is the status quo for part-time residents, which would also be considered seasonal residents, and it is because the category was created to grandfather in an existing use when the original driving regulations were created. And the Seashore has always planned to phase out this category once there are no more qualified applicants. Any change that allows additional part-time residence permits is counter to the purpose and need of the ORV management program update, as all driving permits exist to supplement essential access when water-based transportation is not available. And this access is available during the months when seasonal residents or part-time residents occupy Fire Island. Alternative B was developed after careful deliberation of the public comments we've received so far throughout this process, primarily in response to the release of the preliminary proposed action that included the permit caps as proposed in column C. Generally, commenters were not in favor of using only category criteria without a fixed permit cap, while many commenters recognized the need to increase permit caps some. In response, the Seashore developed new caps for residents and construction business, but we did not specify a cap for public utilities and essential services to maintain flexibility in permitting and provide enough access for these critical service providers that keep the communities running under dynamic conditions. For the most part, this is a change in how the regulation is worded, as the current practice is to permit these services under fleet permits that allow multiple vehicles per one permit. Under both action alternatives, the Seashore would no longer issue temporary ice-over permits, which is not a category in the current regulation, but was a practice that was added over time and creates a large administrative workload for the park that was primarily caused by there not being enough permits for qualified year-round residents and construction business drivers when water-based transportation is disrupted in the winter by a freeze. Increasing the permit caps should generally eliminate the need for those temporary permits, which creates certainty for qualified applicants while reducing work for Seashore staff. Where there are new permit caps proposed, the Seashore team considered the following in developing these caps: public comments, the apparent demand for permits based on the number of year-round residential households, and the wait list for qualified applicants across the permit categories. That part-time residential permits will fade out, and this is offset by the addition of more year-round residential permits. And the apparent need during ferry service interruptions, such as during ice overs, for access by qualified year-round residents and contractors. For contractors, we also considered that carting of construction debris will be permitted solely under the construction business permit category, and that existing community infrastructure may not allow for these materials to all go by water. So by increasing the construction business permit cap, we are accounting for this use. Also, that this regulation needs to allow the Seashore to be able to effectively administer the program for the foreseeable future and in a dynamic environment. Next slide. This slide summarizes the round trips per day that would be allowed per category under each alternative. And note that the only changes proposed here under the action alternatives is to increase trips from 1 to 2 for essential services and decrease from 2 to 1 for recreational drivers. The biggest change to note here, which we'll talk more about later, is that a trip is redefined as through the NPS gate, not on and off Fire Island, which is how the current reg defines it. And next slide will be Jason.
Thanks, Brendan. So we've often struggled administratively to draw clear lines between residents and non-residents based on the existing definitions. These updates provide us with clearer direction on evaluating and reviewing residents' continued qualification as year-round. So the new qualification for year-round residents would be persons who are legally domiciled on the island and who, in addition, physically reside in their fixed and permanent homes on the island continuously 7 days per week for 12 months per year, except for brief and occasional absences. And brief and occasional absences are defined as being absent from one's Fire Island residence for no more than a total number of 60 days during the permitted driving period each year, with no more than 14 consecutive days at any one time. Applicants for year-round resident permits will still be required to demonstrate 1 year of residency in their Fire Island home before they will be approved for a permit. Next slide. So the updated construction business qualification more clearly defines the park's evaluation of year-round work and updates our current regulation to better represent the existing conditions. So the eligibility for a permit would require proof of work for an extended period of the year, the quote-unquote year-round work, consisting of at least 6 months of work total within the construction business driving season, with up to 3 months from the previous year's driving season allowed to be used to meet this definition. Next slide. The definition of essential services has also been updated slightly. Essential services are any motor vehicle whose use on Fire Island is essential to continued use of residences. This may include vehicles actively used for transporting heating fuel and bottled gas, and sanitation or refuse removal, but not including construction refuse. Note that this construction refuse would shift to the construction business category. So we're not looking to eliminate the use, just shift the category. We also considered the shift of construction refuse to the construction business category when developing the proposed caps for Alternative B. And I'll pass it on to Sonia.
Hello. Okay, this chart lists some of the differences between the alternatives. The main difference is the proposed action has caps and the alternative action has no caps. Proposed action B, these actions will allow year-round residents access, which should work better for residents and the park as there would be fewer exceptions. Contractors who have year-round work would have simpler access, but are expected to go by water when it is available. This is a more streamlined approach, showing a driving season and a no driving season for all categories except utilities and essential services. Alternative action C, these modifications were added to be responsive to public comments while being consistent with the purpose and need. Alternative C has a version of a shoulder season similar to the no action alternative. Next slide, please. This slide is another way to visualize the proposed changes. It compares the 2 action alternatives and no action and highlights the relationship to plover season. We're modifying recreational driving to reflect the months when plovers are not on the island. For proposed action B, residents and essential services will have no weekday restrictions, and driving is authorized from Tuesday after Labor Day through the last day of school for these categories. Contractors will have no weekday restrictions, and driving is authorized from the Tuesday after Columbus Day and ends the first Friday in May. Public utilities will drive as needed throughout the year to service communities and maintain infrastructure, except when there are beach closures. And recreational driving is authorized from September 15th to January 31st for sportsman fishing and hunting. This is a change from no action to allow for a longer season that doesn't conflict with plover season. For Alternative C, residents and essential services will have no driving on weekends beginning the Friday before Mother's Day through the last day of school. Contractors' weekend driving has 1 additional week compared to the proposed action B and ends the Friday before Mother's Day. And the public utilities and recreational driving is the same as the proposed action. Next slide, please. So listed here are the overarching considerations for both alternatives. We redefined a trip as a trip through either the west or east gate, which is critical to enforcing our regulations. The current definition is a trip off the island, and it's difficult to enforce. We considered the vehicle type. The 36 CFR 7.20 only allows 4-wheel drive vehicles. The alternatives will now include all-wheel drive vehicles. The next consideration was to update the regulations to allow certain existing practices, such as access to eastern communities through the West Gate because of the breach at Old Inlet. Next slide, please. And the superintendent maintains the ability to close the beach to driving for resource and safety concerns under all alternatives. And the last consideration was long-term climate change and sea level rise projections and the related viability of driving access on Fire Island. Next slide, please.
All right, great. Thanks, Sonia, and thanks to the rest of the park staff for that overview. Can we go ahead and go to the next slide here really quick? Just a big picture where we are in the planning process. You'll see here on the slide that there's a yellow arrow pointing to we are here. We're at NEPA public scoping. Now, after the public comment period closes on December 4th, the planning team will consider the comments that we received, discuss the proposed refinements to the proposal, and they'll start writing the environmental impact analysis. The goal is to have a EA or environmental assessment for the public to review in the late spring of 24. And at that time, the NPS will once again take comments. They'll ask for feedback on additional data that needs to be considered, alternative elements that should be considered as part of the proposal, and any other impact considerations. The updates to the actual regulation or the Blue Book are expected to follow a concurrent process that might be slightly staggered. And then if all goes as planned, the NPS would provide a decision document to the public to review in the summer of 24. Updates to the regulation or the Blue Book would be expected to follow shortly after. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that I would share some information on how you can provide formal comments, and we're here right now. The NPS's preferred way to receive comments is through, we call it the Pepsi site or park planning. That's the project website. And again, if the moderator could please drop a link in the chat, it would be appreciated. I promise that if there's anybody on the phone that I would read this off for you. So if you have your pen and paper handy, the website address is park planning, which is all one word, .nps.gov, G-O-V, and /FIIS_ORV. If anybody's curious, FIIS is the NPS acronym for Fire Island. And written comments, if you don't want to use the website, the written comments can be submitted via mail to the park headquarters at 120 Laurel Street in Patchogue. That zip code is 11772. And a reminder that the comment period closes on December 4th. You'll see here on this slide that we note that providing comments is not a form of voting. And so what the NPS is looking for is constructive, substantive comments on the proposal. So whether or not you're in favor of what we've presented tonight, just the NPS wants to understand why. So thank you for those comments. Next slide. If anybody joined late, I just wanted to mention that we're going to move into facilitating the Q&A session via Zoom. Our meeting participants are going to stay muted just to avoid the background noise and other technical issues. So if you have questions, please enter it into the question box. I'll reiterate that during the Q&A session, we're going to read questions out loud, and we may lump similar questions together just to help avoid redundancy. And another thing that we ask is that the questions you guys submit are focused on the scope of what we're talking about tonight. We know that we're going to there's a lot of attention in this issue, and we want to make sure that we stay as focused as possible and that we're answering those questions pertinent to the proposal that we're talking about tonight. Our goal is to get to all of the questions to the extent we can, and in the event that we can't get to everything before 8 p.m. Eastern time, we just ask that folks continue to submit comments via Pepsi. So with that, the team is going to move into a quick break so that we have a chance to grab a drink of water, and we're going to go over and see what questions we've had submitted so far. So we will be back here in 3 to 5 minutes here to help facilitate the Q&A. So Tia, if you could just put a message in the chat that we'll be back here in a couple of minutes, that would be appreciated, and we'll see you here shortly. Thank you all for your patience with us as we work through navigating the Q&A session. Looks like we have a lot of really great questions coming in. So we'll go ahead and start off our first question here. We'll send it over to Superintendent Romero. Alex, the question is, how is increasing the number of vehicles preserving the natural beauty of Fire Island?
Thank you, Michelle. This is you could probably cut this question up in a few different pieces. So even though we are increasing the amount from 145 to 200 residential permits and up to 145 contracting permits, it doesn't guarantee that everyone's going to be issued a permit. They still have to meet the type requirements that we just went over this evening. The other thing I will say is that we will continue to monitor our law enforcement arm will continue to monitor and enforce the law. And then, as it was highlighted towards the wrap up of this discussion, that the superintendent does reserve the right to close any beaches if there is any damage or potential damage to the resources. So there's a couple of ways that we can slice this question up, but our ultimate underlying goal is to protect these resources and the beauty of Fire Island National Seashore. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. And again, monitoring the resources, identifying the amount of permits or how the permits are issued doesn't necessarily mean everyone's going to get to that 200 cap or 145 cap. They still have to meet the requirements. And our law enforcement officers will continue monitoring and enforcing the new regs as they are written.
Great, thanks for that answer. Okay, and then for the meeting moderators, if there's any reason to take this slide down at this point, feel free to do so if that helps facilitate the meeting any easier. I have another question here that we'll move into. Looks like this next question, we'll pass it over to Sonia. Sonia, they're asking, are the communities being considered, or is Fire Island National Seashore only concerned with the park?
So our primary responsibility is to protect the resource and safety of visitors. The Seashore has no jurisdiction in the communities, but the towns and villages can limit the driving in the communities by limiting the number of permits that are issued through those offices. The park intends to continue to work with the communities on matters that cross jurisdictional lines and impact our neighbors, including on driving.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. Sorry, my mute button was a little sticky here. So actually, we're gonna ask that you stay on video here. We'll go ahead and put another question back over to you. The question is, can you please explain what is meant by adequate waterborne transportation?
All right, so these are notes coming straight from the 36 CFR because that hasn't changed. So currently water-based transit defined as adequate when the schedule of transportation service in question permits departure from an island terminal before 9 a.m. and departure from a mainland terminal after 5 p.m. on the same day. And when the interval between the earliest and latest service provided by the transportation service in question on any day exceeds 8 hours, such service provides at least one round trip between the mainland and the island during that interval, and the island transportation terminal in question is no more than 1 mile from the point of origin or destination on the island, or from a point on the island to which access by motor vehicle is permitted, and the mode of transportation in question is adequate to carry the person or object to be transported. So moving forward, the Seashore is interested in comments on clarifying the definition in a way that works for all parties.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay. Alex, I think that the next couple of questions we'll throw over to you. we'll start off with this one. Will Fire Island National Seashore continue to regulate and administer permitting and control gate access for driving on Fire Island?
Simple answer to that is yes, we will. We received some funding for design and implementation of a new gate at the checkpoint. So more to come on that. I don't know the year that we're planning on actually installing the gate, but right now we are in the planning stages of what would be a new monitoring system and gate at the main entrance.
Okay, great. And then Alex, this next question is asking, will there be a reduction of access and any changes of first responder access to Fire Island?
Yeah, no, at this time, there is no plan to change official vehicle access, including police, fire, and EMS, Fire Island, to the Fire Island areas. They are, first responders are essentially keeping our resources safe, our community safe, and at this time, there's no plan in reducing that at all. So let me see what I have. Any other thoughts on this thing? No, that's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Alex. We'll give you a break now, and we'll send this next question over to Jason. Jason saw it coming, apparently. So, Jason, will there be a reduction of access in any change? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong one. Will there be a reduction of waste removal by truck on Fire Island?
So first and foremost, if waste can be removed by water, it still should be. Alternatives B and C limit the total number of vehicles per permit holder for the purpose of waste removal, both sanitation and construction refuse. And so the effect of it will likely be yes, but the priority was focused on those limitations.
Great, thanks for that, Jason. All right, it looks like we got a lot of good questions coming in still. So thanks for those of you that are out there that are continuing to engage here. Alex, this next question will come back over to you. The question is, will there be more consistent enforcement of beach and interior driving regulations on Fire Island?
The Seashore will continue to enforce all applicable laws within our jurisdiction on lands that we administer. Generally, lands within the communities are under the jurisdiction of Suffolk County Police Department and where applicable village authorities. We will continue coordinating with all these authorities of cross-jurisdictional issues.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Looks like there are a couple of questions here that I can probably go ahead and answer. Somebody is asking how many people have attended this particular meeting. I actually don't have access to the full participant list, but I did hear from the moderators that it looks like 144 is the number that we're seeing here on our end at this point. So really, really great participation. Thanks for everybody that's out there. The next question is asking, when will the recording of this meeting be posted? We anticipate, I believe that it should be posted within 48 hours. Our team just has to make sure that we can apply closed captioning so that we're meeting all of our accessibility requirements. So our goal will be to have it posted and in the 48 hours, and it will be available. We'll include a link on the Pepsi site for the recording. Okay. Thanks for your patience as I read through these questions. It looks like we have another one here that we'll shoot over to Jason. Jason, the question is, has any consideration been made for seasonal homeowners other than those seasonal homeowners that had permits since 1973, especially in Kismet, that is not serviced by ferry from November until April.
We actually did evaluate a number of dramatic alternatives, including things like permitting all groups, and we dismissed it relatively early on. The primary reason is we were looking to limit driving to only that essential access, which couldn't happen otherwise by waterborne transportation, or that was for secondary residence or something of that nature. So the answer is yes, we did consider it, but no, we did not move forward with authorizing it in the alternatives.
Okay, thanks, Jason. All right, we have a really a lengthy question here, and also kind of a statement. So I'm going to read through this. And Alex, yeah, I see you came on. So great. This is wonderful. So the comment says, my greatest concern is regarding the scope of essential services. My company distributes and services the majority of the recent installed modern I/A septic systems on the island. We currently have close to 100 systems installed on Fire Island and more being installed monthly. Our systems require maintenance every 4 to 6 months, and pump outs are necessary every 2 to 5 years, depending on the use. Currently, this individual or the business is without means to pump and service the systems in accordance with their systems requirements. They're not contractors, but rather distributors and service technicians, and their concern is the level of waste currently building up in the systems without a practical means to pump them. And there is fear that they could face a public health crisis if they're unable to address these systems appropriately. What they are asking in particular is, would septic fall under essential services? And if so, would that allow this business to have a permitted service vehicle and a four-wheel capable pumper?
So this is a very good question. And I think this is exactly why we're doing what we're doing, going through this process to allow for some flexibility within the the new reg change once we come to that position or that closure fall of next year. But the park will continue to work closely with communities to identify and permit appropriate access for essential services that cannot be feasibly completed over water. So that question came up even during our internal planning discussions. And again, exactly why we're going through this process to allow some flexibility for these new systems that we are not forecasting in the future. So that allows future superintendents and future staff to make necessary adjustments as needed if it's considered an essential service.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alex. So we have a little bit of a lag, it looks like, here on my end with the questions that are coming in. Let's see here. I'm going to okay, so I have one here that I'm going to go ahead and take, and if anybody from the team wants to piggyback on, like, feel free to do so. But the statement is, it seems like it is a statement, perhaps the largest issue we have currently is that there's no formalized system for temporary permits for infrastructure repair. Our community association and fire department volunteers work very hard to get to the towns, county, and utility companies to repair the dangerously degraded infrastructure. These entities or their hired contractors then ask Fire Island National Seashore for temporary permission to drive onto the island. These requests are most often refused, forcing the operation onto the barges, and this delays and prolongs the projects and makes the cost of the project skyrocket. I and most others strongly believe this system needs revising. Thank you. So I'll say that that is something that we consider as a comment, something that we have it captured here. And if the individual commenter has any additional information or thoughts or solutions, we would ask that you just provide that in the Pepsi site for the team to consider. It's a important point, and we definitely hear the concern there. So if anybody from the park has anything to piggyback onto that, feel free to pop on. Otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. This also is another, it's seeming like a comment, but I'd like to share because it did come in. This individual saying, while speaking of protecting natural resources, I'd like to mention that the majority of these systems are followed by pressurized shallow drain fields. These drain fields consist of 2-inch pipe buried, in some cases less than 12 inches from the top grade. I'd like to impress upon you the fragility of these systems and the possibility of rupturing and leaking waste at the top of the soil. And I can understand that driving needs to be restricted to the off-season, which we are more than happy to accommodate, but pumping cannot be restricted to the winter months, as freezing temperatures can impact pumper function. And this individual is offering to help provide solutions. And so it sounds like they're also planning to be at the meeting tomorrow night. So we look forward to seeing you there. These are the types of comments exactly that the team is looking for as part of the public scoping period. So thank you for taking the time to write out the thoughtful response. And we just ask that you also include that in comments in Pepsi or the park planning website. Okay. Good. We have a lot more comments coming in. Just a time check. So here we are at 7:27. Our team is planning to stay on until 8 p.m. Eastern time. So please keep the comments coming in, especially if you, in response to some of the answers we've provided, if you have further questions you'd like to share with us or refine, submit those via Zoom. And with that, we'll go now over to Sonia for a question. And so Sonia, the question is, how many temporary permits are granted annually?
So this varies from year to year, and the last few years we've had less than 50, and it's based on waterborne transportation, if it's available or not, and need. You have to demonstrate a need for why you need to drive when there is no ferry access. So the short answer is less than 50 temporary permits. And I think I have the next question too.
Yeah. All right. Let me find out. Here I am. Yeah, you sure do, Sonia. Okay. So I'll go ahead and read it really quick. How do contractors demonstrate that they have 6 months of business in order to qualify for the permit? And will they need to requalify each year?
So yes, they need to qualify every year. And it's, I don't remember I think Brendan or Jason was saying that you need 6 months total of proof of work. And it could be 3 months from the previous year in the driving season and 3 months of the current year. So you would have to send that in, and it has to be a total of 6 months.
Okay. Thank you, Sonia. All right, Alex, we have another one that's coming over to you, and it seems like this is both a comment and a question. So I'll go ahead and read through it here. They actually address you specifically, Alex, and they say that you mentioned the enabling legislation in your opening remarks. How will the driving rig and or the NEPA environmental assessment reconcile the 1964 enabling legislation that states in Section 7B that access to that section of the seashore lying between the easterly boundary of the Brookhaven Town Park at Davis Park and the westerly boundary of the Smith Point County Park shall be provided by ferries and footpaths only, and no roads shall be constructed in this section except such that minimum roads as may be necessary for park maintenance vehicles. No development or plan for the convenience of visitors shall be undertaken therein, which would be incompatible with the preservation of the flora and fauna or the physiographic conditions now prevailing. And every effort shall be exerted to maintain and preserve this section of the seashore, as well as that set forth in the preceding paragraph, in as nearly as their present state and condition as possible. So, Alex, turn that question over to you.
Michelle, I'm sorry, I had to step out because someone was at the door. Which is the question? I'm sorry about that.
Oh no, I'm sorry, Alex, too. Okay, so I think for the meeting participants, I don't need to read the entire legislation,
Sure.
but they're really
Oh,
just
yeah.
asking.
Okay, I see where you're going. So
Okay,
I
thanks.
see the question, right? Is it's the one about the NEPA, what I spoke about earlier today?
Yes, exactly. That's it.
All right, sorry about that. So I had to get that.
Oh, no
Apologies,
worries.
participants. As I mentioned early on, the enabling legislation is what established us as a park, and we use that as the kind of fundamental place where we begin this whole process, the NEPA process. So we will not deviate from what established us, and we will not, go against the legislation that was written. So we will continue using that as our kind of guiding principle through this whole process. Access for convenience to visitors, it's not going to be part of this. It's really focused on the residents that are living here, the essential contractors and contractors that work within the boundaries of the park. But beyond that, that's it. It's except on the easternmost point by Smith Point County Park, where we allow for recreational use. Hopefully that gets to the question. That gets to the question and the answer.
Yeah, I'm sorry for catching you off guard there, Alex. Thanks for chiming back in. Okay, give Alex a break here, and let's go over to Brendan now. Brendan, the question is, what, if any, is the environmental impact on our delicate ecosystem of the differing options? And thank you for taking the question.
Yes, thank you. Well, first and foremost, as it's been mentioned multiple times, the Seashore maintains the ability to close any area for resource concerns, whether it be natural or cultural resources. And that's going to change on a day-to-day basis with the dynamic conditions out on the beach. And any of the alternatives, we're really considering what people are doing when they are following the rules. That is driving where they're supposed to be, including far away from the dune and not on the dune and impacting dune vegetation. So, of course, there is some impact to the existing behavior. But what we are evaluating is there an impact in the change that we're proposing? So there's not to say that there's never going to be an impact from driving on the beach, but we believe that if folks are following the rules, that the impact should be minimal as it is now, and that those who do not follow the rules should have their permits revoked. And that is how you can minimize those impacts, regardless of how many permits are issued.
Thanks, Brendan. Okay, moving down here to the next question for Jason. The question or the request is that we please address how allowing driving all day until the end of June aligns with the proposed objective to maintain public health and safety. There are a lot of pedestrians and bikers on the community sidewalks in June.
It's always going to be really difficult to balance that essential need for access by year-round residents with the increased traffic, foot traffic, and bicycle traffic. So coming up with a timeline was dependent on our history of need for access and trying to align as best we could with the suspension of school schedules and things of that nature. So based on the traffic patterns, which are still not at peak levels as they are in peak summer, that's kind of what we balanced against that need for access. And then, of course, within the communities where there is perhaps even more limited space for pedestrians or bicycles to pass by, communities may further restrict that driving access. So we are focusing on protecting our lands and visitors as they're crossing those lands.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, it's like there's still like a bunch of questions that are coming in, so we're trying to get through them here as quick as possible, and we're going to do our best to try to get through all of them before we have to end at 8 o'clock. So there's a question here. There was another question resubmitted about defining adequate waterborne transportation, which we did answer earlier. And there's a question here about how the parking of vehicles that will be permitted on Fire Island be monitored. I think that is something that the park is working on right now. If the public does have thoughts or opinions about ideas or suggestions, if you're seeing something out there that might be happening in a way that you feel it shouldn't be, you can definitely submit those questions via Pepsi. I see Brendan came on. Do you want to piggyback on that, Brendan?
Sure. And I think it relates to another question that's on here, Michelle, which is how will the total number of allowed permits be distributed among local jurisdictions for management? And I think both of those are questions about things that happen within communities that are outside of our jurisdiction. If folks are, for the first one, for parking, if people are parking on NPS lands, that's generally something that we don't allow without special permission for very specific circumstances. And so the assumption that we're making is that if the town or village issues a permit, that they've vetted the requirements of that permit, and that the people have a place to park within the communities. And so those are really issues that should be brought before the town and villages that are also issuing permits. And as far as how permits will be distributed among local jurisdictions, again, we're not deciding to divvy them up per town or village, with the exception of the municipal permits that will be allotted to each community, which is 5, and that's the status quo. That's not a change from the existing practices. But the towns and villages have permit programs as well, and could decide to allocate based on whatever criteria that they came up with in collaboration with the hamlets on Fire Island to divvy up those permits.
Okay, and Brendan, you can actually, it looks like maybe the next question is coming over to you, Brendan. So they're asking if is the driving data on the driving history and permit wait lists available to the public, as that would be helpful to understand where the current bottlenecks are, the current regulations?
Sure. So the driving data is gate record data that's connected to individuals, as is the wait list. So that's not something that we are going to release to the public without it being heavily redacted. And because that contains personal information about individuals. But we do include we do plan to include a summary of the data in the environmental assessment that will be provided for public comment as part of this process.
Brendan, I want to piggyback on your thoughts. We've had also some internal conversations about how do we potentially code it as well, just to allow it under a code system that people could see, where they are with a particular code, instead of giving out that PII, personal information. So there's been some internal conversations of how we could release some information to give folks an idea of where they are on the waiting lists, but through a coding system, which we haven't fine-tuned just yet.
That's right, Alex. And I think that would be something we might implement if it was the current program that we were going to continue to administer. That we're hopeful that there won't need to be a wait list if we raise the permit caps.
Okay, thank you both. Next, let's go over to Sonia. Sonia, the question is, how was the 60 days / 14 days timeframe determined for those who travel on business? This is wholly unreasonable. They're talking about the definition of.
Sorry, I was trying to get my way back on the screen. The definition came from we wanted to align with the definition for the town of Islip, and it's as close as it can be to the town of Islip. We were not considering people who travel for business because that, quite honestly, was never a question or a situation that came through to my office. There were a couple occasions that we had someone who said they were going away for 2 weeks, and they sent us an email and let us know. But other than that, if you have suggestions that you think might work for somebody who goes away for business, please input it into the Pepsi and we'll review it.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. Going back now over to Jason. Aside from the convenience of full season homeowners being able to access their homes during the proposed extended shoulder weeks and months, what other reasons are there to extend the driving season and to make shorter the current restricted times?
So both alternatives, B and C, provide for fewer hours restrictions for residents who were essentially already being granted exceptions to drive during those periods of time. And so the park adopted basically the current practice, acknowledging that there was a high administrative burden to an essential rubber stamp on the approval of those exceptions. But other categories have actually been further restricted. So we evaluated the types of requests that we get and the need for access during those periods. And that's essentially why we came up with that.
Okay. Just FYI, like we are getting a couple of duplicate questions and so a couple of things that are not necessarily related to the driving program. So some of those questions we will go ahead and skip in the spirit of just staying focused on what we're talking about tonight and trying to get through all of the questions that people are submitted. Let's see here. There was a question about whether seasonal homeowners have any path to getting driving permits. And I think that Brendan did address that a little bit earlier in the presentation. As with anything, if there's comments that you want to submit as part of the scoping period, please feel free to do so in Pepsi. This next question, let's go back over to Brendan. Brendan, they're asking if any traffic studies have been done by Fire Island National Seashore in regards to any potential environmental or safety conflicts between pedestrians, bicyclists, wildlife, and vehicles on the Burma Road between Robert Moses and Kismet, with the proposed increase in driving?
There's no traffic specific studies that have been done on Burma Road. We do plan to increase our monitoring as we are able to do with our resources of all the potential impacts that may be, or all the potential MPS areas that may be impacted. And we're also hopeful that we can expand that monitoring in collaboration with the communities and towns and villages to track impacts across the board. But that's something that would require a lot of collaboration and planning.
Thanks, Brendan. Lots of questions coming in here. Okay, let's go back over to Jason. Jason, will the town have the final decision as to a permit being issued? The current anonymous advisory board is not familiar with all of the full-time residents.
So the final decision for a permit being issued from the National Park Service will remain with us. We will consider the town's decision on issuing a permit, and will also honor, if a permit is not granted by the town, a denial on behalf of the Seashore as well. So you must have all local permits, and that will continue on into both alternatives B and C.
Thanks. Okay. Sonia, we'll bring you back on here. Excuse me. The question is, what's the difference between a seasonal homeowner and a part-time resident?
There is no difference between those two. It's residents who have a home on Fire Island and they visit it and they don't live there year round. There are some part-time residents who do live on the island year round, and they have the luxury of coming and going as they want. They're not restricted to living on the island year round, but essentially seasonal and part-time resident is the same thing.
Thanks, Sonia.
Can we clarify that, Sonia, if you don't mind, as far as permits? And what does that mean as far as permit use and how that's being phased out?
Well, the part-time residents, they had permits continuously pre-1978. So other seasonal homeowners, if they didn't have permits before 1978, then they will never get a part-time resident permit from us.
I think
and they won't get a year-round resident permit from us either, because you have to live on the island year-round.
And I think that's the point that I wanted clarification. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Okay. Going back over to Jason now. Jason, they're asking if the definition of brief and occasional will be changed under option B and C to maintain residency for 12 months a year, being able to be away for 60 days or no more than 14 consecutive days. Excuse me. How do you plan to enforce this during the no driving time of year?
Yeah. I think because we're focusing on the need for essential access via vehicle, our primary concern is going to be the driving season. So the summer season, with full alternative waterborne transportation and no driving, we're not going to seek to aggressively monitor that requirement. It will just be during the driving season. Of course, if you have suggestions otherwise, or how we should monitor that, we encourage you to submit those in comments.
And it looks like you read my mind here for the next question. So also, as the proposed driving season is based mostly on the plover nesting season, how would the park deal with, for example, considering climate change and warming ocean temperatures if sea turtles start nesting on Fire Island? That nesting is usually during the summer season. In this scenario, there could be the possibility of closed beaches March through August, question mark.
So there's a couple different things here. I think maybe they are referring to the change for recreational driving as far as the driving season being based mostly on plover season. Because that's not accurate. The driving season is based on when there is adequate water-based transportation presumed to be available. And then, as we've said multiple times, we need to protect our resources first and foremost. That's our mission. So it's more accurate to think of it as these resource windows, including plover nesting season, are sort of overlaid over the management program. So that driving access is allowed when these other concerns are not in play. So that would be the same for nesting turtles if that is to occur in the future. But at this time, that's not the conditions on the ground, and we have no indication that that's going to be something we need to manage in the near future. But as an example, we used to have just a few piping plover pairs until just a few years ago when the numbers exploded, and that has had serious impacts on various categories of driving. But again, our mission first and foremost is to protect the resources in addition to the visitors. And so the reality of the situation is that when the beach needs to be closed for whatever reason, people need to find a different way to get there when those stretches are closed, or when there is park or tidal restrictions or something like that. People need to plan their trips.
And the next couple of questions, Brendan, looks like they're all resource related, so we'll send them over to you. The next one is, would increasing the number of permits threaten wildlife like piping plovers, deer, or other Fire Island animals?
So we would continue to close the areas when there's different categories of resources here. The piping plovers are a federally listed endangered species. And as I mentioned, we're one of the key pieces of information we're considering is those coordination documents we have in place with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So we are legally required to implement the Endangered Species Act, and so no, by using the seasonal closure system that we have in place now, we have shown great increases in the piping plovers. That's likely part of the reason. As far as deer and other Fire Island animals, the interactions are generally not on the beach, but we certainly, if we see any particular resource impacts, we would consider that in our decisions to manage the situation day to day, week to week, month to month. But as a big picture, this is a regulation that is the starting point for how we manage a program. And then all of these other resource considerations are laid on top of that.
Okay, thanks. And one more. Would there be any consideration for allocating a portion of the 5,000 trips per year dedicated to recreation to be allowed to part-time residents that are homeowners? As a homeowner who frequents Ocean Beach every weekend in the summer, I'd love the opportunity to bring a carload of things on and off the island once or twice a year during the driving season. It seems like there should be some kind of option for homeowners that aren't looking for a full-time pass.
So again, we're happy to accept any comments or suggestions through the Pepsi system. As far as this particular suggestion, I think we're conflating things. The recreational driving is an entirely different category in an entirely different area. These are National Park Service visitors that are getting access to National Park Service land, as opposed to private homeowners, which are basically what all the other permits are for, either for that access or supporting. So I don't think that we are likely to make that particular change between those categories, but we're certainly accepting comments on ideas.
Sorry for my sticky. It's here. Okay. Brendan, another question here, resource related. What scientific studies have been conducted to explore the impacts of any of these plans?
So the NEPA process is usually done or almost exclusively done using existing information. So we have done both the park and the broader National Park Service have done many studies on the impacts of driving on the beach and the impacts to resources. So those are used as part of this process. But as far as the impacts to a particular resource of a particular addition of hypothetical drivers, no, that has not been done. We will have some analysis of these scenarios in the environmental assessment, but to call that like a scientific study would probably not be accurate.
Okay, got about 5 more minutes here. Definitely a lot of questions. Sonia, we're gonna send the next one here over to you. They're asking how many permits are issued each year relative to the 145 permit cap.
So the 145 permit cap refers to the year-round resident permits only, not all the categories. So you have 145 year-round resident, 100 part-time resident, 80 contractors, 30 essential service, and then official use is unlimited. They get fleet permits, and utilities get fleet permits. And then you have the temporary permits and municipal permits, which are limited to 5 for each community. So I issue about 400 to 500 permits a year, and the 145 is only one category. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's where you're at with that.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. And actually, we're going to have you take this next question here too. They're asking if we can discuss what type of verification process will get implemented island-wide to ensure applicants truly live on the island year-round. The current verification process seems fractured, and it does seem to vary by community or even town. Thank you for your response.
That is a really good question, and we're still working on that. So if you do have any solid suggestions, please enter them in Pepsi so we can review them and consider them. So as of right now, it's just we're working on that.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Sonia. Alex, I think we'll go to you with the next couple questions here. This first one is asking if the Seashore has reached out to all community leaders on these proposed changes, and they're asking if you know the general consensus.
So I'll try to make this quick since we are at the top of the hour. So we have this NEPA process, all the planning and outreach that we've done as it related to the preliminary proposed action got us to this point where we are now with the new proposed caps. It's that conversation that we've had with community leaders that got us to this point, and also the responses that we received during the preliminary proposed action. So there's been a lot of discussion with community leaders, with congressional folks, as well as the towns, in formulating essentially where we are today. For exactly this new proposed action, we have not, only because we wanted to go through this process now, this public scoping process to gather your feedback. But we will probably engage with them in the near future, like we've been doing all along during this whole pre-NEPA process.
Great. Okay. I think we have time for a couple more questions here. Alex, we'll have you stay on for this next one. It's a staffing question. They're asking if there are any plans to add staff to meet the objective of enforcing the driving rules so that a proposed 120 more vehicles don't spoil the natural beauty and the quality of the island.
I completely agree with this sentiment because it is our resources, our park. And I mean that generally all of us, the 7 layers of jurisdiction that I described earlier today. So I would say right now we don't have the funding. It's a finite number that we have. And with the proposed budget cuts that are expected in this coming year and the following year in 2025, it looks like, if anything, the budget will be tightening even more. And it's uncertain what our future holds as far as future positions. We may not have the funding to replace in-kind people that end up leaving the park. But to your point, to your question, I think it's important that this is a collaborative effort. This is going to be something that we have to work closely with, again, the community leaders and with the villages, even with the county, with what they are seeing as well, and responding accordingly, having folks be our eyes and ears so we could respond accordingly, assess and respond accordingly.
Okay, so we'll take one last question here. Jason, we'll throw it over to you. They're asking, what are the consequences of exceeding the number of trips per day?
So the limitation on trips will look very similar to a permit condition as it is now. And so law enforcement action would be taken for a violation of those conditions. And the penalties could be up to and including permit revocation. So compliance is important.
Okay. All right, great. And then I will, there's one last question here that I can go ahead and take really quick. The question is asking about tomorrow evening's meeting and whether it will be substantially the same, but in person. And yes, tomorrow evening, pretty much the same team members are going to be present. We'll be sharing the same presentation. I guess the only part that'll be a little bit different is the Q&A session. We'll be taking written comments similar to past meetings that the park has hosted, and we'll have the panel available to answer those questions tomorrow night. So I'm going to give a quick wrap up here in a minute, but before I do, I'd like to turn it back over to Superintendent Romero for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Michelle. You kind of stole my thunder, and I just wanted to say that tomorrow we will have an in-person public meeting. It's pretty much a carbon copy of what we presented today. The only thing I would say is that there would be more opportunity for one-on-one discussions with the planning team, and we will have displays up. The charts that we shared will be available for more analysis, more questioning, and more one-on-one dialogue, as well as a group panel discussion. So some of these questions that you heard tonight may be repeated tomorrow, but there may be a different set of questions that may be asked. But I just wanted to thank you all. We're down to 113 participants. I think we lost around 40 participants from today's call. And I just wanted to say thank you for your active participation, your genuine care for the resources, and trying to get us to a place where we could all work together in accessing homes and accessing areas safely, protecting the resources, providing visitor safety for a resource that we all do care about. So if we don't talk tomorrow, have a great holiday next week. And we will be talking, I'm sure, in the near future regarding this subject. So again, many thanks, and that's it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Alex. So we do acknowledge that there was a bunch of questions that came in tonight, and we were not able to get to all of them. So our plan is to do our best to keep the frequently asked questions site updated. So we're going to take some of these unanswered questions and try to provide FAQs to those. So if the meeting moderators could once again drop the link to the FAQs into the chat, that would be appreciated. I mentioned this earlier, but thinking about everything that you heard this evening, if you have constructive comments or questions about how the proposals can and should be refined or additional data, that's the kind of feedback that we are looking to you for. So please provide those comments in Pepsi. Yeah, I see that dropped in the chat. That's great. And just like a final reminder that where we are in the planning process, we're at NEPA public scoping. So a decision hasn't been made. We are just wanting to share what we've created so far based on what we think we've heard from public feedback. And so share those comments with us. We look forward to hearing from you. And with that, we'll let you go. Have a wonderful evening, and hopefully we'll see some of you tomorrow night. Take care.